This is the Paltalk News Network.
The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVN Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users. I'm having trouble saying that. I'm going to have to change it. With more than 4 million users. Why do we say unique users? I'm not exactly sure. On demand on iTunes and on YouTube and on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you're encouraged to post your comments, whether you agree with yours truly or not. No retribution. And thanks to our good friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, we're syndicated to an additional 12 million households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. I welcome you to the show, and I remind you once again to go to our news site, PaltalkNewsNetwork.com. Check it early, check it often, just like voting in Chicago, to make sure that you're not left out in the cold, because we have stories there that you may or may not see, hear, or read in the mainstream media. I'm your host, Gary Baumgarten. To my right, your left, is Pamela Glasner. She is the new author of a new novel called Finding Emmaus. I said it right. I actually practiced that, Pamela. A harrowing 350-year fictional yet factually based journey through the history of treatment for the mentally ill. It eventually exposes a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy between the pharmaceutical industry and the United States FDA, a conspiracy in which millions of Americans are being misdiagnosed and drugged for no other reason than the enormous income they generate and to turn them into zombies. Okay, I added the part about zombies. Welcome to the show, Pam.
Thank you.
Can I call you Pam? Pamela. Okay, Pamela. Very good. I almost broke your hand when I shook it. I apologize for that. I heard it go crack. Maybe for that you do need drugs. I don't know. Maybe I do. So it's a novel, but it's based on fact. Tell me about that.
Originally it was going to be a love story.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a few chapters, and I liked it,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't grab me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided that I needed to look for something that, like a hook, something that really knocked my socks off.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually did end up using those love story chapters, but they're at the end of the book, not at the beginning. And somebody had once told me that you can, as a writer, you can pretty much get people to withhold their beliefs or just, pretty much take in what you want them to, as long as you tell them the truth.
Right.
Okay. So, and that doesn't mean that you can't write fantasy or, about vampires or whatever, but everything else in the story needs to be so. And so when I started writing, really getting into the meat of Finding Emmaus, and I'm really not sure about that fact, and I would look it up, I found out that I really did enjoy very detailed in my research.
Mm-hmm.
Half the story takes place in the 17th century, half the story takes place in present day. And so in order for me to write about the 17th century, I needed to do a lot of research. Early 17th century, there's not a lot of information here. Most of it, they were very busy trying to survive, so they weren't writing their memoirs.
Right.
So most of it is in England, so I had to go to England to do a lot of my research.
Jolly good.
Oh,
So the thing is, though, back then in the 17th century, the 1800s, they did not have the kind of medications that we have today to treat what we now view as mental illness. So, but they did lock people up in asylums.
Well, yes, they did. Everybody's heard of Bedlam. It's actually Bethlehem Royal Hospital. People think of it as Bedlam.
Right.
And in about the 1300s, it became an asylum for the mentally ill.
Right.
Because everybody knew back then that mental illness was, they called it lunacy.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knew back then that lunacy was contagious. So they needed to be segregated from society.
You better move a little bit further away from me then,
Oh,
because if it's contagious,
Yeah, well, I don't know if you'll catch yours. I'll catch yours. But they also believed, the doctors back then believed, that the only cure for lunacy was physical torture. And so when I went over there, I was...
Some people pay for that down in Greenwich Village.
Well, that's probably fodder for a whole other show.
Okay.
When I went over there, I was given access to, you can get access to files that are over a certain number of years old.
Right.
And so I saw drawings, obviously not photographs, of some of the apparatus that they used to torture. And it's funny that you should talk about the difference between then and now, because the truth of the matter is we still torture people. We're just a lot more sophisticated about it.
Chemically torture them.
Absolutely.
But let's be fair. There are people who would not function if they were not on medication, right?
Well, I'm not a physician, and I am absolutely, and I have to be very careful because I do get letters saying, oh my gosh, I read your book and I love your book, and my daughter was diagnosed as bipolar and I'm taking her off the medication. I'm like, oh my God, don't do that.
Right.
Suddenly stopping the medication under any circumstances, very dangerous and can be fatal. What I learned when I was doing the research, though, was that 70% of the time, and that's not my numbers, that's the CDC,
right.
70% of the time, the psychotropic medications do not have their desired effect.
70%.
70% of the time. But almost 100% of the time, they have side effects.
Well, and that's, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a perfect segue into my next question. Nowadays, it used to be, we knew nothing about the medications that the doctors had at their disposal. It wasn't something that they sold to us. It was something they sold to the doctors. But now they bring it to us directly in the form of television advertising, and then we're supposed to go to the doctor and ask for a certain medication. And all of these medications to treat depression, and they show these people their la-di-da, oh, it's like sunshine, and oh, my life, and that's great. I'm sure the medications help some people. They start listing, by law, they have to list the side effects. And every single time, without exception, when they talk about a medication that you can ask your doctor to prescribe for your depression, the side effects include suicidal thoughts. Excuse me, I'm depressed. I want to feel happy when I take my happy pill, not suicidal.
But antidepressants have, in the first 90 days, doctors have to watch their patients very closely. They get weaned on, and then eventually they get weaned off, and during the 90 days, is there something?
Yeah, they want me to move the device closer to you.
I'm sorry.
Because you're soft-spoken.
My husband would disagree with you. During the first 90 days that you're on antidepressants,
yes,
and the last 90 days when you're being weaned off,
yes,
are very, very dangerous times. The likelihood of suicidal, it's